Hi guys, in this video we're going to look at the human heart. Now, hearts are fairly similar across all mammals, so this could be generalized to the mammalian heart, but we're going to concentrate on the human heart in this video. We're going to talk about the heart, we're then going to go into some anatomy, look at the two different circuits, and work out where the sound comes from. So the heart is an organ that sits inside the chest, and it sits just to the left-hand side of center in the chest. It's about the size of a fist, and it's made of cardiac muscle, so heart muscle. Now this muscle is an involuntary muscle, not that it doesn't want to be a muscle, but that you don't have the ability to control when it contracts. So with your skeletal muscle, for example, you can control it, it's totally voluntary. With the diaphragm and breathing, that is a semi-voluntary, because if you don't think about it, you'll just breathe automatically. But if you do think about it, you can cause yourself to hyperventilate or hold your breath, so you've got some control over it there. The heart, you don't have any control over, so you can't think and go, oh, I'm going to slow my heart down, or I'm going to get my heart to stop for a little bit. It just keeps on pumping no matter what. Now, it pumps about 70 times per minute. Now, this obviously changes depending on how fit you are, how old you are, and whether you're doing exercise or not. And at that resting rate of about 70 times a minute, in that minute, pumps 5 litres of blood. Now, the body only has 5 to 6 litres of blood, which means that it only takes a little bit over a minute for the blood to travel all the way around the body through both of the circuits. And we'll look at those circuits in a minute. We'll now look at some of the anatomy of the heart, which sounds like a My Chemical Romance song. Now it's split into 4 chambers. So we have 2 atria on top, the left atrium and the right atrium. So these are singular atrium, plural atria. And we have 2 ventricles on the bottom, the left ventricle and the right ventricle. Now you'll notice that the left atrium and left ventricle are on the right-hand side in this diagram. This is because when a heart, or a lot of this anatomy stuff is depicted, it is depicted as if you are looking into somebody else's chest at their heart. So in the same way that your right hand isn't going to line up with their right hand if you're face to face with someone, the left-hand side of their body, so the left ventricle will be on your right-hand side, which is what we're seeing here. So this left and right hand side are separated by a wall of muscle called the septum, which sits in here. Now blood comes in through the atria and then goes to the ventricle and then out of the ventricle, and it enters the atria through veins. So on the right hand side we have the vena cava. Now there's the superior vena cava that comes from the head and arms, and the inferior vena cava, which comes from the lower half of the body, and they drain blood into the right atrium. The left atrium gets its blood from the pulmonary veins. So you have the left pulmonary veins going to the left lung and the right pulmonary veins going to the right lung. Once it's pumped, it leaves the blood is pumped, it leaves the heart through the arteries. Remember, arteries away both start with an A. So the left ventricle pumps blood through the aorta being an artery, again starting with an A. That aorta then splits into a whole heap of different arteries that go to different parts of the body. The right ventricle pumps into the pulmonary artery, which then splits to the left and right lung. Now on either side of the ventricle, both coming in from the atria and going out to the arteries, we have valves, and these valves stop the blood from flowing in the wrong direction when the ventricle contracts and releases. So between the atria and the ventricles we have the atrioventricular valves, and this sounds like a big word, but basically it's just putting atrium and ventricle together to show that it's going between those. On the left hand side we have the bicuspid valve, on the right hand side we have the tricuspid valve. The other valves occur between the ventricle and the arteries, and they are called the semilunar valves. On the right hand side we have the pulmonary valve going to the pulmonary artery, and on the left hand side we have the aortic valve going to the aorta. And I mentioned that there are two circuits. This is the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit, and they are divided in the same way that the left side of the heart and the right side of the heart are. So if we follow the path, if we start in the right hand side of the heart, remembering that that's on our left, we have deoxygenated blood. That deoxygenated blood, when the ventricle contracts, will get pushed through the pulmonary valve, along the pulmonary artery to the lungs. That will then, the lungs will get oxygen into that, oxygen attached to the blood. So we've now got oxygenated blood. That oxygenated blood will carry along the blood vessels until it gets to the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein will drain the blood into the left atria. That blood will then move through from the left atria to the left ventricle through the bicuspid valve. When the heart then pumps, that pumping will send it through the aortic valve to the aorta, which will go to the rest of the body. Now the body uses the oxygen for cellular respiration, so deoxygenated blood is then returned to the right hand side of the heart to the atria through the vena cava, the superior and inferior vena cava. It then travels through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, back to where we started. Now you'll notice in this drawing, or in this diagram, that the deoxygenated blood is shown as blue and the oxygenated blood is shown as red. This is a general way of depicting this blood to just show the difference between the deoxygenated blood and the oxygenated blood. I'll just remind you that all blood is red. If you were to cut open at any of these stages, you would find that the blood was actually red. There's no point in the body where we have blue blood. Now let's talk about the sound. So the sound that the heart makes is referred to as a lub-dub sound. So that's when the heart beats, or those ventricles contract. So the atria doesn't actually contract. The blood sort of drains into that and then swishes into the ventricle when it's ready. So when the heart contracts, the ventricle contracts, that contraction causes the atrioventricular valves, so the ones between the ventricle and the atria, to slam shut, so that that blood gets pushed into the arteries rather than back into the atrium. Once that's then pushed out, the ventricles relax, and that when those ventricles relax, the semilunar valves slam shut, and that's slamming shut so that the blood then doesn't come from the arteries back into the ventricle, but rather the blood comes into it from the atrium. So that's the valves that we're hearing closed. That lub sound is the atrioventricular valves, and the dub sound is the semilunar valves. So the sound makes a lub-dub, 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 and so that sort of contracts, waits, contracts, and that's contracting at the start of the contraction, and the end of the contraction is where you hear that sound. In this video we've talked about the heart being a muscle that pumps blood around the circulatory system. We've looked at the anatomy of the heart being split into 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles, and split into left and right through the septum and separated by valves. We've talked about the 2 circuits, the pulmonary circuit, which goes to the lungs, and the systemic circuit, which goes to the rest of the body. And we've talked about the lub-dub sound that the heart makes when the valves close, the lub being the atrioventricular valves and the dub being the semilunar valves. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.